So employee ownership, I talk a lot about employee ownership to people, and usually there's a temptation to start with structure, shares, trust, distributions, governance. All those things matter, but they're not as hard as culture. And so I think it's a really good thing for you to be talking about culture, and it is one of the hardest things, but also one of the most rewarding things. And so Odia Reimer is joining me today, and she is very deliberately called our VP of People and Culture, and that's because we want to put extra emphasis in our company on the cultural aspects of how we operate and how we own the company together. And so the structure of the business is sort of the right that the beneficiaries have to participate. But that's just the structure alone. It's the culture that kind of gives them the liberty or to choose and think and act like an owner on a daily basis. And so I think that's an important distinction. Just because you set up a structure doesn't mean you've accomplished any culture, nor does culture replace good structure either. But those two things are very separate from one another. And so it's hard for us to talk about culture succinctly because it's been 70 years. Our employee ownership culture at Friesens has been 70 years in the making. And so I can't take full credit for it. Odia can't take full credit for it. But it doesn't happen automatically. It happens through very deliberate actions that have occurred over that period of time. And it's not a perk. It's not like a perk that people intuitively will understand, where you say we're employee owners and suddenly everybody starts acting differently. It is something that takes time, effort, and energy to do. So if anyone's thinking that it's an easy thing, it's not. And so you got to buckle up and make sure that you're focused on it. And so what an ownership mindset shows up also in very small, unglamorous ways, right? And so it's about caring about quality, safety, continuous improvement, and then really understanding sort of the trade-offs in the business between reinvesting capital into things like equipment and automation and new facilities, and the trade-off with paying ourselves as employee owners. And so it's also in having confidence to ask questions and kind of put yourself out there. And that doesn't come easily either. You can't move from a culture that's very top-down, leadership, command and control type of oriented, and suddenly change your organization into this democratic, operating, beautiful state. It takes time and effort, and so I think that's a really important acknowledgement as well. And so we spend a lot of time and energy, and we're sprinkled through our discussion today or through our questions today. You're going to hear a little bit about, what are the tactics? And so Odie and I spent some time trying to think about what are the specific things that we can give you, rather than, we love to talk wax poetic about all the the high level benefits, but what are the actual things that we do that make it happen? And so it goes from things like training to communication to how we engage with each other, how we celebrate together. And so there's hopefully through this conversation, you're going to get that sort of flavor of things. And so we're big believers in employee ownership. We've got the war wounds to prove it. And this company wouldn't exist had it not been for employee ownership. And so I think there's that shared understanding of the privilege that we all benefit from because of the situation that we're in. And I think that's inherent also in some of that cultural piece. And so I think that's kind of where I would kick off, Natasha, and sort of kick it over to you if you want to ask questions.
Yeah, you kind of teed it up perfectly when you were talking about the things you wanted to go through. The first question I have is when you talk about ownership culture, what does that mean at Friesens? It's kind of a big question, but I feel like all of those things you were kind of highlighting, it probably means all of those things, right?
Well, it does. And so I want to give you three specific examples. So ownership culture is sort of, again, how it feels on a day-to-day basis when you work here. And so there's three programs that I want to draw your attention to, or three themes, I guess. One is in my company. So if you walk through Friesens, what we've done is we've taken all of our corporate values or individual tactics, And we've baked them into a campaign called In My Company. And so if you walk through the shop floor, you'll see banners on the ceiling and on the walls of individual employee owners. And beside them will be these value statements. And so every company has values and they try and connect their values to people in a meaningful way. But in our business, what we use employee ownership to really drive home in my company, quality matters because in my company, safety matters because, and in my company, follow up with my customer in a timely manner matters. And so we link that all back to these aren't just good values for how to operate within a business. They're really good values for how to own a business as well. And so we use that in my company campaign as sort of a call to action for the individual tactics that we want employees to deploy. The other one is this sort of mentality we talk a lot about is me before we, or sorry, we before me. Apologies. And so the whole idea behind we before me is that this is a mutually beneficial effort. And so where that really comes into play is when you're doing things like team building or trying to have setting goals. We are not an individualized goal company. So we put far more emphasis on mutual goals, mutual benefit from those goals. And that sort of we before me type of mentality carries through not just shop floor, but right up through how we operate as board of directors and management has that mindset to it as well. And then the other one is called Stop and Ask. And so there's a campaign we've termed for the last probably almost a decade now, which is the call to action to say if let's say general employee in a non-employee owned environment might walk past something that's happening and not take action because that's not my job, that's somebody else's responsibility. I don't want to get involved because I don't want to overcommit. In our world, we've tried to normalize the idea of stop and ask. And so whenever you see something occurring, whether it's in your space or not, you as the employee owner have the right to stop everything from happening and ask good questions, whether that's I need to get clarification on whether we're doing something right before we do more of it because we don't want to be wasteful as employee owners. It could be something like, hey, I'm seeing a fellow employee owner maybe acting in an unsafe manner, and it's my responsibility as an owner because I'm looking after the liability and the well-being of the company. It's my responsibility to stop and ask and really lean in. And so those three would be great examples of sort of what does it mean beyond sort of the legal structure. It's that kind of being deliberate about making sure that we think like owners on a daily basis.
I'm curious. This is not in my list of questions, but how do you get new employees to internalize that productively? Is that ever a challenge getting new people on board, or are they seeing it working so seamlessly that they kind of, yeah, Odia's like laughing a little bit. Is that a hard thing to get new people to understand, or does it kind of flow because other people are doing it productively? And
It's like, it really starts on day one. And it was actually something that Chad and I were talking about when we were preparing is it's so embedded. It's actually hard for us to sometimes pull it out and go, okay, now what would a normal company do? And what do we do that looks a little different because we are just so used to it, right? And
Right.
so everything is wrapped in employee ownership. And so when we're talking about, we're training people, we're doing orientation, we're doing all these things, we are instilling ownership in what does employee ownership mean? What does it mean, that we have an open door policy? Like a lot of companies have open door policies, but what does that mean for Friesens, right? And so we're always unwrapping all these things. But the other part that's really fun is we do the training, the orientation, sort of the grunt work behind employee ownership, but the stories people tell as somebody is new and being integrated into Friesens is really fun, where you hear the stories of this is what ownership means over here. And so, because you have the sort of the corporate messaging, but then you have the employee messaging that comes and sort of buttresses everything we're saying and sort of that everyday environment. And so those are fun, right? Where you have this sort of the colloquial stories that are out there, right? Where, people talk about the owner and how he was like, when you go through Friesens, it's really clean and it's really organized and it's really, and so people notice that and they go, why is it so clean? And it's like, well, this is employee ownership. We all care. We all take care of it. And the original owner's family was Mennonite. And so they were really cracked is what we call it, where everything's lined up and straight and narrow. And so you have these pieces where there's this story that permeates. And I think that is also a part that helps that integration and that embedding into the fabric of what is Friesens. And it's not quite the same as everybody else in some ways, right? Where you feel that difference.
You didn't just drop a Low German term on a webinar.
I did, sorry.
Sorry, that's another a different cultural spin. But Natasha, it's like, I'll give you a quick example. So Herman Thiessen caught me in the hallway about I'm going to say 6 months ago, and Herman was ticked off because he thought that the guy on the other shift wasn't doing as much as he could to make sure that we were preserving value in the task that they were supposed to do. And so Herman engaged with the individual and said, we're both employee owners. Your actions are impacting my EOT distributions and my pay from this thing. And so he probably shouldn't have come straight to the EOT to talk about his issue on the shop floor, but it told me, listen, Herman really believes that he's an employee owner in the organization, and he wants to take action to preserve that space. And so that's a great example of it's not just Odia and Chad that are doing it. It's like Odia says, it's really inherent across the entire group.
Yeah, it's amazing. So how do you go about communicating distributions and kind of having employees understand that the EOT, the trust distributions, so that it kind of reinforces the full ownership story rather than them just seeing it as a bonus? How do you find that works, or how you do it?
I see EOT like we call it employee owner days. So I came from marketing before I got into the VP of people and culture, and there's a lot of marketing in Chad's past, and so there's a lot of marketing that kind of blends in. And so when we really noticed that EOT wasn't being wasn't received the way we wanted it to be, we actually put in employee owner days, and so now it's a celebration. It is like there's balloons, we're handing out physical checks. That's the other thing, is it's not just like a direct deposit where there's nobody talking to you. You get a notice, and then it's actually like Chad signing every check. We're stuffing envelopes. We're doing the work to ensure that we actually get to see everybody gets to come to the table and get an envelope. Even if you started today, you would get an envelope with a gift of some sort. We have a specific gift for a certain group, and then you get an EOT. And so everybody gets an envelope, everybody comes to the table. And then that day, usually there's food, there's usually a gift of some sort, even above the EOT check that they're getting. So there's fist bumps, there's music, and then the culture at Friesens is quite light and fun. So there's lots of joshing, and there's lots of like camaraderie, and how long have you been here, and how, you know what I mean? There's lots of that. So I think that's a part that this is not just a profit sharing check you're getting. This is a celebration. We all worked for something, and then we have a little bit of celebration for it, right? And we do that 3 times a year. So potentially. So that is the other piece, is it's, we have banners that go up around at all the entrances saying employee owner days are here, right? And so, we celebrate it.
Well, that's interesting, because like the next question is, it's been employee owned for so long. Like we were curious about the decision to make the benefit of employee ownership kind of regular while you work at the company versus something you get at retirement, which other structures could do. That's a hard thing to answer when the company's been employee owned for so long, right? The two of you didn't do the transition, but you did just mention how you're doing this regularly, you're doing it visibly. Like, why is that so important? Why is that something that's so important at Friesens, to have it be regular and so visible? Because that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought.
Well, we've had a bunch of different models, right? So our old model was more like an ESOP, where employees would buy shares, so they take on their own financial risk. They'd acquire shares. They'd hope for appreciation of that value over a career, and then they would receive their value on the back end. So fast forward to when we reset to the EOT. Now everybody's participating, not just those that have the ability to buy. Everybody's participating, And so we're distributing less, but over a broader group, right? So it used to be 25% of our employee owners would participate, 25% of our employees were employee owners. The other 75% didn't participate. And so the payments that those 25% would receive would inherently be larger than if you spread it across all 100. And so we inherently in the model, we said, where are we best to share the value? And we had this moment, we had an opportunity to consider that. It's back in 2016. We said, do we want to create sort of a golden parachute or some kind of equity, synthesized equity that people would receive on the back end, even though the value wouldn't be as great as if they had bought the shares themselves. And we wouldn't be able to afford to do both, share now and share later. And so we decided that given where society is at and where our employee group was at, we said we're better off sharing in the moment, sharing the value in the moment, because that's going to help with retention in the near term. And it's also arguably going to get families value at a time when they could use it the most. And so if you're fortunate in life, usually you have less and less demand on money as you get into your older years. It's when you're in your 20s and 30s and 40s when you have pretty significant expenses that you're facing, and you may not be at your peak earning potential. And so we said that was the time when we wanted to participate, because A, was going to lend itself to retention, and B, it was going to get people the value. And the third thing is it helps us deal with liability. So if the company built these big savings accounts that were going to be bestowed on employees when they leave the company, we have to set aside cash for that. We have to set up reserves, or else we're going to put the company in jeopardy long term. And so by just sharing now, we actually mitigate that risk completely. And so I think, Odia, maybe you want to share a little bit about the total value statement, because that's one of the things that we run the risk of, because it's not exactly a exact link to how ownership works. People aren't taking on financial risk, receiving sort of an equity payout at the back end. And therefore, we have to communicate to everybody how they're developing value and how they're seeing value on an annual basis. So I think it's important that we maybe share with you a little bit about our total value statement. Odia, do you want to walk us through that?
For sure, yeah. So when we do our compensation increases throughout it's in one time in March for the year. And so during that time, we actually give everybody a total value statement, which outlines, what you're making, what your base wage is, but then what are all the benefits of working at Friesens? And so, which includes employee ownership, but there's also things like, what is your short-term disability look like, your benefits? Like, it goes through the whole thing, so that when people are looking at, because we can get lost in the base wage kind of discussion, and that, you see other people, well, they're getting that and they're getting that. And it can be, oh, I'm not getting as much. And then we go, oh, look at all the stuff you're getting. Being an employee owner has value. And this is where we want to outline what that looks like. And so all the managers every year, they go through and they go, hey, this is what last year looked like for you. And it's not a template, it's their numbers, right? And so that is a lot of benefit, because our turnover rate actually is quite low for manufacturing. Usually it hits in the 20% range. We're at like 8, 9. So
wow.
I don't know if that's a direct correlation, but I see it as. And so, that is something that we see as a benefit to help see it have that in conversation, right?
Yeah, and at the end of this total value statement, what ends up happening is you start the statement with a base wage, and at the bottom of the statement is an effective wage. So we can say your base wage might be $25 an hour, but once you add all these things in, including your employee ownership benefits, you're actually at an effective wage of $33 an hour. Yeah. So don't get distracted when you're driving down the highway and you see somebody else advertising $25 an hour, because your effective wage is far exceeding whatever they're offering, right? And so it helps us a little bit with really instilling the value in the employee owner, but also protecting us a little bit from, the marketplace coming after and trying to fight us on wages, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's smart. So pivoting a bit to kind of communication with employees, what have you found works best to help employees really understand what's driving company performance and what's affecting the distributions? Because that's got to be a big part of it, is that communication and the financial education as well, I imagine, is a
Yeah.
big part of it.
So keeping it in check. So I equate this a little bit to like your home insurance policy. You really don't care about the details until it matters, right? And so that's a little bit like an employee. We take that approach with employee owners. Most of our employee owners don't want to understand the intimate details of our balance sheet, of our financial statements. They need to know that they have access to them. They need to know in general terms how the concepts play together. But we've tried not to overextend our effort to try and turn everyone into a financial knowledgeable employee owner. So that's the starting point, is really being measured with what's the depth at which people really want to engage. And so we have courses in our learning management system specific to how do we make money. And so somebody can take a 45-minute course from Chad that explains, this is how we make money in this business. And more importantly, this is how we retain profits in this business. And so we talk about things like, material, cost of materials, cost of labor, but we also talk about, reworks and the cost of waste and how that ties in, where it ties into the financial statements. We talk about things like maintenance on presses and maintenance on vehicles, and how all of those things tie together into really helping reduce our expenses and drive up our bottom line. So one is sort of some educational components. Two is every year we share a business plan. And so we're a printer. And so we have the great benefit. Since 1982, we've been printing our business plans. We distribute them to every employee owner. And so that's another way that we can demonstrate not only here's how we performed last year, here's what we're expecting for the next 3 years. And so every employee owner, whether they choose to or what depth they choose to engage, they have access to learning more about what's coming and what our plans are in place. And quite frankly, hold us accountable. And so Odie and I are meeting with an employee ownership council tonight. And so this is about 10% of our employee owner group. And so they have the opportunity to listen to what's going on in the organization. We share some of our strategies and some of the obstacles that we're facing as a company. And they have the opportunity to put me on the spot and ask tough questions about why is this, why is that, why was performance the way that was last year. And so there's those are sort of the higher level pieces. We also have an annual general meeting, which a lot of companies have, but typically at an annual general meeting, we don't just report on the financials and vote in directors. We actually do a deeper dive in each one of our businesses. The business leaders stand up in front of the employee owners and they explain. We have 3 businesses that we operate within the Friesens Corporation umbrella. And so each of the 3 business leaders will stand up and they'll explain how they won, how they lost, what their plans are for the future, et cetera. So there's that accountability piece that comes with it. But then on a more day-to-day basis, it's also emphasized. And so we try to, and Odia's team is exceptional at this. So what we try to do is load the lips of our managers so that when they're having one-on-one meetings, so touch base meetings or huddles with their teams, that they are also able to explain the sense and meaning behind either strategy or some of the financial decisions that we're making, or some of the changes that are coming for the company. And so there's sort of this multi-leveled, from sort of top end financial business plan sharing to more tactical, what's happening on the shop floor and how does this matter to you today, type of approach. And so it has to be multi-layered throughout the organization.
Wow, that touched on so many of the questions that I had.
Sorry.
So one question I have that I think maybe you've already fully answered, but there may be a little bit more there, which is how do employees have voice at Friesens without creating any confusion over decision making? Like you kind of talked a little bit about that, how the frontline managers talk to their teams in huddles. You have the AGM, you have the business plan. You also talked about that the employee owner committee. Like, is there anything more to say there about how you do that?
Yeah. So we do, people really have the ability to speak up wherever and it will funnel. Like we have a really good, we're a small town. And so things, the information travels. And so it does, but specifically, yeah, we have the employee owner council. We also have our open door policy, which some people say they have, but I actually think we really do have. Like anybody will walk into Chad's office and really be able to tell him how they're feeling, right? And so, or they walk into my office, or they walk into any of our like their senior leaders, right? Or they walk into their managers, and then that funnels up. So there is a really strong employee owner council, employee open door policy kind of culture, I should say. We also have our continuous improvement, which so this is where it kind of gets interesting because we have the classic things that manufacturing organizations would have, like continuous improvement. We have an employee engagement surveys, but we use that as a way of also speaking into employee, like our ownership model. So we really believe that CI, our continuous improvement, that people have a voice to speak up there, and then it funnels up as well. Or even our engagement survey that we do each year. We actually have 3 going on in the year as kind of pulse surveys of how things are going. Those are all areas where they can speak into as well. So yeah, you're right. We've talked a lot about a few things, but we do have more where people have the ability to speak into without, like you're saying, they're not making decisions. That isn't the role, but it is to speak into and to add their opinion or their ideas or their improvements, because there's lots of that going on.
Yeah. That's wow, that's great. I kind of want to open the floor up to questions just in case we have any burning questions. I have many more, but I would love to make sure that other folks' questions are answered too. Does anyone have a question? Feel free to, turn your video on or not, unmic and just speak it, or you can put it in the chat and I can read it out loud. Either works. If anyone has anything that they've been wondering about, time goes really fast on this.
Hi, I'd love to ask a question if I may.
Yeah.
Hi, hi there. I'm just following on from this. I'm actually just to give you a little context. I'm doing a doctorate at Royal Roads on workplace democracy, so that combination of employee ownership, but also distributed decision making. So just following on this question, so you currently don't necessarily have any kind of distributed decision making power that doesn't exist outside a conventional, but amazing amount of employee voice and participation. I love that. Yes, in your history, have you ever experimented, or is there tried to have decision making either at the job or the strategic level of sort of a broader base of employees, and that didn't work, or have you just stayed away from it? Or just kind of curious about the history of that, if you would be willing to share.
I would say we've dabbled. We've dabbled in it. I'm a firm believer that it's beneficial ownership, not active participation in decision making. Mostly because, quite frankly, many of our employee owners aren't as interested in that level of participation, and just the effort that, quite frankly, it's the effort required to try and establish it. And so we've focused very much on the beneficial ownership aspect of it. So where we've tried to build some of that, sort of participation in, is a couple things. One is our board of directors has a non-management employee owner on the board. That person is elected by the employees, the broad group of employees, and it can't be a management level person. So the idea is we want to have a shop floor voice around the board table. And so that's really important for us. 2 is the majority of our board of directors is our employees. And so we've codified that the majority of the board will remain employees. That also runs some risks because you become insular, can become insular in your thinking if everybody's coming from the same organization. So we've been also very deliberate to have 1/3 of our board represented as external directors that can bring that perspective in. I think one of the other, so the Employee Owner Council is certainly one example. The annual general meeting, even though the trust ultimately votes the shares, so that's an important aspect in our world. So there's a trust that owns the shares. The trust ultimately, the trustees of the trust can determine, essentially who gets nominated or who gets elected to the board of directors. But we do have an election every year, and the employees participate in the election. So there is a vote. We will present nominees. People have the opportunity to put forward a nominee, and then we'll present those nominees to the employees, and we carry a vote. And so those are participation. One of the other ones that I'm really fond of is when I took over, it was really the CEO's job to determine charitable giving in our organization. I thought, how dumb is that? We're an employee-owned company, and we're only going to give away donations based on my interests or my influences. And so what we ended up doing is we built a thing called the Employee-Directed Giving campaign, where we set aside charitable dollars into a fund. Every year, we put, first of all, a group of employees helps narrow down a list of, let's say, 15 different charities that we're going to consider. And then all of the employees will vote. And so it's one vote, each employee will vote for their favorite charity, and that determines the outcome of the charitable giving. And so then we have employees that are out into the community or into different charitable organizations, handing out checks, being the face of the company, not just the executive handing out money. And so I know that's not probably exactly what you're asking for, but what we've done is we're very committed to maintaining a more classic sort of authority in the organization, so we can move quickly and make decisions quickly. But we've tried to adopt some more broad-based participation in some other areas, so that it's more than just I work here and I get a check. We wanted to also have a few other areas where people felt the participation.
Amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have a chat question as well from Stacy. And that is, what are your recommendations in facilitating strong conversations within the context of establishing a new employee ownership culture?
Well, start early. That's probably number one, is this idea of it takes a lot of work, and so I would start early and map out your entire organization. So I think it's one of the things that we've realized over time is it's not just one aspect of your business. You have to have this broad perspective. And so if I was starting down a path with a new EOT, I'd actually run a strategy session on what are all the touch points for our employees across the organization, identify which ones have some attachment or influence on the employee ownership experience, and then drive out kind of a tactic for each one to say, what are we going to do in that space that is going to be different than what we do today? And how are we going to hold that out as part of our employee ownership culture? And so I think we've shared a bunch of things with you today that aren't a heavy lift, but they're very deliberate to say, if somebody ever asked me, how do you do bottom-up communication in your organization? It's like, we didn't reinvent it. Like Odia said, we adopted lean principles through continuous improvement. Therefore, our employee owners are having huddles on a daily or weekly basis with each other. And that's going to be the communication method by which we use to funnel information up. But just thinking about the things that you might be doing already in your organization, but how would we approach them a little bit differently, given the employee ownership context, and learn from each other. I think ultimately, it's a small employee ownership community in Canada, but there are some exceptional employee-owned companies that have been there, done that. And so that's I see this a lot, where people start down a path of trying to do this work, and they almost feel like they have to do it by themselves. They want to craft their own thing, and they want to start from scratch. And I get that's maybe energizing, but ultimately you're going to make a bunch of mistakes that other companies have already made. So we don't have a corner on how to do employee ownership the best, but I would say after 70 years, we've probably tried and failed more things than any other company, and so that's a helpful place to go to say, what did you learn, right? And I think that's starting early and then watching all of those different aspects, I think is key.
That's great advice. Stacy says thank you.
I saw that.
Anyone else have any questions? You can type them or just speak them if you do.
I have a question, and sorry, didn't have my mic on for a minute there or muted. Tell me a little bit more about the other employee owner cultures that you've seen done really well, and maybe what companies those are.
There's actually many of them, but one that comes to mind that you might be familiar with, and maybe there's somebody from Spartan on here, but Spartan Controls has certainly established a really robust employee ownership culture, and yet the structure is quite different than Friesen's structure, and so I'm always intrigued by it. You know, Spartan has more of a, I believe, more of a skin in the game type of approach, where the employee needs to be personally invested into the ownership aspect, and they've built their entire model around those principles, right? And it's worked well. It's worked exceptionally well for them, and I'm a big fan of Spartan Controls. And yet, you know, from our perspective, we have a little bit of a different community and a little bit of a different staffing base, that the same fundamentals wouldn't necessarily track here as well, right? And so I think it's important to maybe look at what is the organization today, and how does that context influence the type of organization. So I'll give you an example. So I've never been a big skin in the game guy. I believe great people try to do great things in life. They all want to have the score kept for them, but I don't believe great people are motivated strictly by how they're going to be financially rewarded by their actions. And so that's a philosophy. But in our organization, it actually is very true. So over 40% of our employees weren't born in Canada. These are people that have arrived here with a minimum amount in their bank account just to qualify for immigration. And so when they're arriving, they are spending money on housing and getting their kids established and basic life. That's it. There is no option for investing. And so we said that the context for us to have our employees taking on significant financial risk in order to participate in our ownership model, the fundamentals aren't there. Like, we're going to end up having a small percentage of our employees with the capability or privilege to be able to buy, and a whole bunch that aren't. And so I think what we also were mindful of trying to ensure that our employee ownership trust structure recognized the type of organization that we were. And so if we were 600 engineers all making six-figure salaries, we might feel differently about the circumstance, but just given the nature of our business, we had to choose this model. Camille,
Awesome.
there's a lot of great companies out there, and if you go to Natasha, you're going to catch me on something. I don't know if we list all of our members on the Employee Ownership Canada website or not, but
we do not.
Anyway,
No.
If you Camille, if you shoot me a message, I'll send you a list of companies that I think would be worth taking a look at.
I'd appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm not sure if you can answer it, Chad and Odia, but there's a question around, and I think if you have any thoughts, great, but I think this might not be the right venue. Questions in the difference that provincially, are there any differences around legislation for employee ownership across the provinces? I think the answer is no.
To a large extent, no. A couple of provinces, including Manitoba, have some tax incentives for ESOPs, but the EOT and tax incentives have all been federal. And so you might find a smattering of different smaller incentives in different provinces. Most of them are legacy types of programs, but yeah, the big push is at the federal level.
That's a great topic, though, Jay. Thank you for your question. That's a great topic for another webinar, actually, because just the fact that there are provincial ESOP tax benefits is interesting um, to talk to folks about. Any other questions from anyone?
Natasha, I thought one point that we didn't get to in the questions that I thought would be maybe meaningful for folks would be how do you communicate the realities of the business with employee owners, right? And so it feels like we've had an endless run of difficult conversations that we've had to have with our employees. And so I would say the starting point for a great culture of ownership is understanding that your employees genuinely wish to be treated like an owner. And I think they acknowledge that ownership isn't always roses, and that there's difficult stuff that happens. And so it's like whether it was COVID or tariff threats or downturns in publishing sector, one of the things that we've tried to be, I'm always err on the side of optimism, and that's one of my weaknesses and strengths maybe. But we try to share the brutal realities of the circumstance as well, to say things are not good. Here's how it's not good, and here's how it's going to impact our business negatively. And we will call it out to say, folks, we are in tough right now. Last spring, we were talking a lot about, we have no idea what the tariff situation is going to be. We have no idea what the trade circumstance is going to be. But here's the 4 things or 5 things that we're doing to try and get ahead of it. But you as employee owners are watching the news. You're seeing all of this stuff going on. And so we don't want you to be anxious without having a line of sight into what we're doing about it. And so I think there's that kind of acknowledgement to say you can't sugarcoat it for people. You have to share the straight goods, and people get it. Not everybody. It's going to create some unnecessary anxiety for some folks that you want to protect them against. But as a general rule, our employee owners would rather hear the truth rather than a sugar-coated version of the truth, right?
Yeah, that's good advice. Lauren, hello.
Hi,
Hey, Lauren.
Hi, Chad. Good question. This has been great. A lot of tactics that management can put in place to get individual employees to exercise ownership mindset on the shop floor. Can you talk about any initiatives that have actually originated from groups of employees, specifically for the purpose of building an ownership culture?
Good question, Lauren. I can speak to a lot of initiatives that come from the shop floor from employees. I'm trying to think of something that would be employee ownership related. It's not coming to mind off the top. Not that it doesn't exist, but that it's not coming to mind. But we have literally hundreds of ideas that are generated every month for the improvement of the business, and I believe that's inherent in employee ownership. And so just because somebody's coming up with an idea on how to improve the amount of waste that we collect in a bale of paper, let's say, it might not be a direct correlation to employee ownership, but it's a direct correlation to saving money and driving to the bottom line. And so I think that'd be my response to that would be, I don't think most of our staff don't think about employee ownership in that way, but at the bottom line, they would say, how do we make more money together? Because if we make more money in June, Chad's going to hand me a bigger check, right? And I think that correlation we've got figured out. The governance side, most of our staff, like I said, most of our staff are, they're working 12-hour days on a production line, and they're doing great work. But they're not sitting at a desk trying to sort of dream up how we could do things better. And I think there's a great deal of trust. I think that's, part of our culture as well. There's a great deal of trust placed in the management team and in their managers and in the board of directors to help guide the company. And we don't take that for granted. And those are hard fought wins as well. Like you don't just get trust because you're an employee owned company. You actually have to demonstrate it. But, another good example, how you gain this in moments of crisis. So May 2020, the world's shutting down due to COVID. And the first thing you hear in the news, public companies are shedding labor like nobody's business. That's all you're hearing about, layoffs, layoffs, layoffs. And so our board of directors sat down and we said, what do we do? What does an employee-owned company do in this circumstance? Because we faced, our business was cratering at the time. And we said, well, we have enough resources where we can keep everybody together for a period of time. We don't know how long that's going to be, but instead of worrying about next quarter's share price, we said we're going to keep everybody financially whole for as long as we can. And so that gave immediate relief to people that they weren't going to lose their job tomorrow or the next week. And in the moment, that just felt like the right thing to do. But I'll tell you, we had at least 2 to 3 years of goodwill that followed that, because people knew you got my back, right? And I think that trust piece that carries us through a whole bunch of decisions and difficult choices that we've had to make, because it starts from that sort of genuine belief that the people that are making decisions in this business indeed have my best interests at heart, right? Lauren, how do you like that for a political answer? I took your question, I turned it into something else.
We're 5 minutes from ending, so I think, and thank you, Chad. That was like of my way too long list of questions. That was one of the ones I was like, we have to get to that question. So you got to it, which is great. I guess I'd love to leave it off maybe the next 2 or 3 minutes if you can just you've already said a couple things, but if you were going to leave this webinar with 2 or 3 solid actionable pieces of advice for newly employee-owned companies, you already said about conversations start early, so maybe that's the first one, but like a couple more things you would just tell someone who's the CEO of a newly formed EOT or ESOP, what would you tell them?
I'd repeat myself again. That's what I'd tell them. But make it visible early. And so this is not a once a year, and it's not a backroom discussion. Make it visible early. Get it plastered all over the organization, that people, when they walk through, so that your customers are asking questions, what's going on here? Then you kind of force everybody to answer that question. And the more times you answer that question, the better you get at answering the question. And the more times your employees have to answer the question, the better they get it answered as well. So visible early, repeat it often. Like Odia said, when I, at one point, we were doing direct deposits into people's bank accounts for their payments. And we thought, why is nobody talking about employee ownership in this company? Well, darn it, you're just dumping cash into their account and nobody's doing anything. And so I truly believe it's the pomp and ceremony is critical, and it feels a little bit soft, but I'll tell you, you feed them, you hand them a check, you say thank you in person. That is going to go miles for your cultural development, just that aspect. And we used to do it once a year. That was the other thing. We used to hand out our payments once a year. We do it 3 times a year now, not because it's easier. It's actually harder to do and less predictable. It's because it's not a year-end decision. But we said, if we do it 3 times a year, now we're celebrating in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall. And so there's always something going on. And so I think that and then bake it into everything that you do, that whole idea of sort of mapping out how we do business, and what does it mean if we challenge ourselves, what does it mean to do that thing as an employee-owned company? I think if you do those 3 things, make it visible early, repeat it over and over and over again, and then build it into every aspect of your business, that would probably be the cleanest thing or clearest direction I could give to a new EOT company.
Well,
Can I just say that it also starts with the top? I think that Chad does a really good job of instilling that employee ownership philosophy right from everything he talks about, always is peppered with and sprinkled with the conversation around ownership. And there's a reason that everybody can walk into his door and tell him how they're feeling, is because he allows it and he celebrates it and he welcomes it, right? And so those are the pieces that, and servant leadership, that's huge at Friesens, is that all the leaders, like when we have our employee owner days, it's the leaders that are serving. And so it's board of directors that are serving. And so actually those 40% new employees who aren't from Canada, they're astounded. They're sitting there going, why is the CEO serving me pizza? Like, I don't understand this. You're flipping my perspective upside down, right? You're flipping what I think is normal, and it's changing everything. And so I think those are base to employee ownership.
Yeah. You get a bonus this year, Odia. Thank you.
That's a great point, though, because I mean, honest, culture comes from the top. As much as we'd like to think it doesn't, it comes from the top. Thank you so much, Chad, Odia. This was so great. This video is going to be watched so many times. The wisdom you fit into the hour is astounding, and I think a lot of people are going to benefit from this. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining. Again, May, we're going to do one on valuations. We're going to have 2 experts, one an M&A sell side transaction advisor and one a business valuator. So you can come with your difficult questions if you're considering an ESOP or an EOT. Thank you all so much. Thank you again, Chad. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Watch the news this afternoon. Watch the news.
Yeah. Let's all cross our fingers.
Bye.
Bye now. Thank you so much again.